Crystron is top tier, but does it stay that way post-Banlist? Hello guys and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, we're taking a look at Crystron. This is pretty much card for card the same list that just won the WCQ minus 2 copies of Golem. And instead, we're playing the third Tristaros as well as a second Temple. And the reason for this is because, first of all, Tatsuku, I believe that's how you say his name, Tatsuku is way better at deck building than I am, so I'm basically just going to try and copy it card for card. And 2, I'm doing a post-ban list look at Crystron. If you don't know, Crystron is a very interesting archetype that fundamentally works by synchro summoning on the opponent's turn. That's the base idea of the way that this deck works. Tristaro says if your opponent activates a card or effect, you can special summon a Crystron from deck and then immediately synchro summon into a machine synchro monster, allowing you to access a wide variety of machine synchro monsters, but most notably F.A. Dawn Dragster, and of course Quarion. Quarion is extremely powerful if you're able to summon it. It does require 2 tuners and a non-tuner, which makes it a little bit tricky to summon, but overall is still very powerful, because on summon, you can target cards your opponent controls or in their grave up to the number of materials used for this synchro, and banish them. 3. Technically, you could also use additional tuners, but realistically, it's 3. On top of that, if it's destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target a banished monster and special summon it to your field. What makes this very powerful is the fact that you can access this fairly consistently. Not always consistently, but fairly consistently. And on top of that, it is an extremely powerful removal effect. Being able to banish 3 cards is extremely good. So, that is the basis of the deck. That is the idea behind the deck, is summoning cards during the opponent's turn, or synchro summoning during the opponent's turn in order to generate advantage or disruption. However, on top of that, all of these have graveyard effects, where they are able to banish themselves or do something else of that nature when in the grave in order to generate additional advantage. Smyger has the ability to banish itself in order to search a spell trap. Thistfern searches a monster. Sulfenir, when destroyed and sent to the graveyard, is able to then special summon a Crystron from deck. And Sulfador can special summon itself from grave by popping a card you control, and then on summon it sends 2 cards to the graveyard. On top of that, even Inclusion has the ability to banish itself from the grave to then special summon a guy from grave as well. All of this pairs very well together alongside the Millennium cards, and the reason for this is very simple. Zombie Vampire. That's it. Zombie Vampire is crazy. Zombie Vampire, one of the things that it does so very well is sending cards to the graveyard. And on top of that, you also utilize things like Golem and the Field Spell in order to put cards into the back row, which can then be sent to the graveyard to make it Doom Dragon. Meaning, if you have something like a Smyger or a Thistfern or something else of that nature in your hand, you can then send it to the graveyard in order to make a Doomed Dragon, allowing the Millennium cards to also facilitate some of the additional plays for Crystron. Pretty solid, right? All of this pairs together very nicely in order to make a fairly decent end board consisting of things like F.A. Dawn Dragster, Cyber Dragon Infinity, SP Little Knight, and the like. All of this is very solid and has the ability to still play a myriad of additional hand traps and other such non-engine. That being said, how good is it post-ban list? This is what it did previously. Does it still do that? The answer is yes, obviously. We're basically only missing 2 cards, and realistically, not much actually changed with that. You could also, change out a few things here or there with, like, Golem, and you could play extra copies of Wedju Temple. The reason I decided to play 2 is because, realistically, I still think that the Wedju Temple is a good start for the deck itself, just due to the fact that getting the cards into the graveyard off of a Doom Dragon is still very valuable. So, overall, it's still worth it to play that additional Wedju Temple. You could also just cut this and not play the additional copy and still play the standard Millennium engine that currently is seeing play in like Fiendsmith and Snake Eye and what have you. So this is not exactly a bad downgrade. It's not like Crystron itself was hit. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna quickly do the card by card and the explanations. Starting off with the 3 Tristaros. Tristaros is such a good tuner and allows you to dodge additional effects. It also has a graveyard effect where you can banish it to destroy a synchro to special summon 2 Crystrons from deck, which is very, very nice. On top of that, we're playing 3 Smiger. Smiger can be normal summoned and then linked off into Knight to allow you to grab the Inclusion, which is very solid, as well as being able to grab Cluster. That's mostly what it's used for. It also has a on-field effect similar to Thistfern. Both of them have basically the same effect, where if they're or you can use their on-field effect or their graveyard effect, but not both in the same turn. And basically, their on-field effect destroys a card and then special summons a or targets a card to destroy it, and then special summons a tuner from deck, which is not bad, all things considered. That being said, we also have one Thistfern, as mentioned previously. We also have the one Sulfonier, which is very, very solid, but requires a discard of a Crystron card. So most of the time you want to search this over the course of a turn, rather than just having it in hand. So that's why we're playing the 1. But we're also going to discard a Crystron card, special summon this card in defense, and then destroy a card you control. Most of the time you'll be destroying itself, because if this card on the field is destroyed by battle card effect, you can special summon a Crystron monster from your deck in defense position, meaning you can summon something like a Smiger and link it off, or you can summon a Thistfern, or of course one of the tuners. We're also playing one Citri, I didn't mention previously, but this one basically just during the opponent's main or battle phase special summons a non-tuner from grave and then immediately synchro summons using it. That's basically its whole effect. However, you banish the synchro material instead of going to the grave, and yeah, that's more or less all that it is used for. It's also another tuner in order to use for the Quarion. That's mostly the purpose of it. Pretty simple. We also have the Sulfador, as mentioned previously, which special summons itself and on summon sends the 2 cards. Very, very solid. Also, this happens to be a 5 alongside the Sulfonier, which can be used to go into Nova. There are also a few locks in here, most notably the Smiger and Thistfern effect. Both of their effects do lock you in some capacity. Sorry, I lied to you. It's the Tristaros effect in the grave, as well as the Sulfonier effect in the grave, that both lock you into machines for the rest of the duel, or for the rest of the turn from the extra. However, the Smiger and Thistfern on field effect specifically lock you into machine synchros. So that is something as well to keep in mind. Sometimes you will need to actually use that effect, but for the most part, you're going to try to not. Everything else is, there isn't a lock. Anyway. We also have, of course, Inclusion, which on activation searches a Crystron card to add to your hand, or yeah, a Crystron card to add from your deck to your hand, and then on top of that, it can banish itself in order to special summon a Crystron from grave. Then we have Cluster, which is absolutely insane. Crystron cards you control can't be banished by your opponent's card effects. That's pretty cool. On top of that, you also have the ability to target a face-up card on the field, and you can target a card on the field, or 2 if you control a Crystron Synchro monster, shuffle a Crystron back into the deck from grave or banish, and then destroy the targeted cards, which is again very solid because it is a consistent removal spell, because you can just do that once per turn. So, pretty solid. And that's the Crystron cards. Then, of course, we're playing the Millennium stuff, 3 Sengajin, the 1 Golem, and the 2 Wedgie Temple. And then the rest is just non-engine. The 3 Veiler, the 1 DD Crow, 1 apiece of Druid Swarm and Magnamut, the 2 Maxi, the 3 Ash Blossom, the 3 Infip, the 1 Nibiru, the 1 Crossout, and of course 2 Called By. Then we're also playing 1 Foolish Burial as an additional way to get our engine online, and it's pretty solid. As for the extra deck, it's pretty simple. We're playing the 1 Doom Dragon as well as the 1 Zombie Vampire for our Millennium stuff. We're also playing the 1 Infinity and 1 Nova, and the Typhon for our Xyz. We're only playing we're playing 2 Link monsters, the 1 Clockwork Knight and the 1 SP Little Knight. Clockwork Knight is basically in here to pivot your Smiger into a full play, basically, so that is generally the idea behind that. We also then have a bunch of synchros, 1 Excel Synchron, which allows you to just use it as a way to get into Quarion and a few other things, but for the most part, it's a Quarion access. We also have things like Samurai Destroyer in here, which is fairly solid, and just being able to attack in, as well as if your opponent Nibiru's you have the ability to use Tristaros to special summon a 5, and then summon this guy, and then when it gets sent to the graveyard, you then get to special summon it from the grave, which is pretty nice. It can summon itself, or something else as well, which is pretty solid. We also have an FA Dawn Dragster. We have 2 Esqueletus, which is a new synchro that on synchro summon adds a Crystron from grave or banishment, and if it's destroyed, can special summon a Crystron from grave or banishment, which is pretty solid. And then we have ourselves at the 1 Excel, as well as the 1 Baron, and of course, Quarion. That's it for the deck. Let's hop into the replays and show you how this deck performed. Alright, so here we are going first, and hey, is that Lakuka Raja? This is just going to show you more so what the actual game plan is. We're going to start off here with the Millennium cards, and this goes to show you what they actually accomplish in this deck. We're going to go for the Golem. Golem is going to go grab up the Wedju Temple. Wedju Temple is going to activate. We're going to put the Veiler into the back row, and then of course make the Doom Dragon. Doom Dragon and the Sengajin into the Zombie Vampire. Zombie Vampire effect is going to mill, and look at that. We also realize that my opponent is on Kashtira, and of course I'm going to yoink up their own Kashtira Unicorn because it's funny. Now, I do a goof, and what I should have done is immediately gone into SP Little Knight using these two monsters. This is just a thing that I consistently make the mistake of doing, but alas, oops. And the reason for this is because later on, it just becomes more difficult the more you do to actually link them off later. And so, for the most part, it's just like nice to have the SP Little Knight in addition to all of the rest of the stuff, and it clears some zones and stuff like that. So, bit of a goof on my part, not really that big of a deal. We're going to send the Smiger to the graveyard and then activate the Smiger effect in order to grab up the Inclusion at this point. Inclusion is going to activate, adding up the Cluster, and then we're going to activate the Sulfador, popping the Inclusion and special summoning itself. Here we can send 2 additional cards. I'm going to send another Smiger and another Inclusion, and then I accidentally activate the effect of Sulfenir because, oops, that's not what I wanted. What I actually wanted was to activate the Inclusion to special summon Tristaros and go from there. But alas, I'm stupid. So I instead do this, and we summon out the Tristaros anyway. Out comes the Skeletus. And again, at this point, I am locked, and I am a goofy goober. It's fine, Skeletus can just add back the cluster anyway, so it's still not that punishing, even though I do that. Here, we're going to pop with the effect of the Tristaros, our Synchro monster, and again, because my zones are clogged, because I forgot earlier to do the thing that I was supposed to do, we then don't actually get to activate the effect of our Synchro monster, so it's a bit of a goof, again, as I previously mentioned. But that's fine, we're still going to make the Dawn Dragster, and then we're going to activate the effect of the Inclusion in order to bring back the Citri. Citri is a bit of a mistake here, realistically. Well, okay. The reason I do this is because all of our monsters are basically in the grave anyway, so it would be much better to be able to use the in-grave monsters as opposed to from deck, because Tristaros specifically summons from deck. So that is something to keep in mind. Citri from grave, Tristaros from deck. There you go. That being said, we do have Maxi, so who cares? But overall, that's more or less what this deck does. They're going to attempt to Raigeki. I am going to simply Dawn Dragster that. And we still have Unicorn, we still have the Cluster, and of course we have the effect Veiler. My opponent then normal summons the Kashtira, or special summons the Kashtira, and it concedes. Drawing Ash Blossom there is very funny, but overall, I still feel like we had a fairly competent hand, all things considered. So, there you go. Good game. Alright, maybe I won't mess up this combo this time. Let's see if that is the case. So we did, once again, draw the Millennium and the Crystron half of our deck, which is pretty solid. We're going to start off here with the Sengajin, grab up the Golem, then we're going to activate the Wedju Temple, and I'm going to put 2 into the back row in order to go into the Doomed Dragon. Again, I'm making a goof because I'm not immediately activating the Golem and special summoning it so that I can go into the SP Little Knight. I keep forgetting this. This is just something that I still have yet to remember, but it genuinely does help the end board quite substantially. Anyway, we're going to mill a bunch of cards and reveal that my opponent is unbranded. That was expected. Not really too surprising there. However, we are going to then grab up ourselves the Sulfador. Sulfador is going to then activate its effects, sending the 2 cards to the graveyard. And of course, we're going to then activate the Thisfern. Thisfern is going to grab a card. It doesn't really matter. It's just there for the Sulfenir. We're also going to grab another card here, which is the Inclusion, because we already have the Cluster in grave. We milled it off of the Zombie Vamp. Out comes the Sulfenir. Sulfenir is going to pop itself, and then activate the effect of summoning out the Citri. Now we can synchro into the Skeletus, and the Skeletus can activate its effect in order to in order to add back the Cluster. Now we can activate the Inclusion that we previously searched in order to grab up the Sulfador. This is basically just follow-up, because now we're going to activate the Inclusion again to special summon out the Sulfenir, and then we are going to go into Dawn Dragster, putting the Tristaros in grave. Tristaros effect is now going to activate, popping the Synchro, and then summoning out a Tristaros and a Sulfador. This then allows us to also summon out the Sulfenir, which then goes into Nova, which then goes into Infinity. So this is generally something that you're looking to end the end board with. We have the Trap card, which pops a card. We have F.A. Dawn Dragster, which is a spell trap negate, and we have Infinity as well. However, this is this is distinctly more powerful than it may originally look, because Tristaros right now doesn't really have much that it can go into, right? It's not like we can go into Quarion because you know, Citry is in grave, and this summons specifically from deck. Well, Cluster specifically does shuffle the card back into the deck, meaning we can target the Citry in our grave, shuffle it back into the deck, and then special summon it off of the Tristaros alongside a used F.A. Dawn Dragster, which is 5, 2, and 2, which makes 9, which makes Quarion. So on top of that, we still have access to Quarion, which is very, very powerful and allows us to banish an additional 3 cards from field or grave. Again, very powerful. So it's Spell Trap Negate, it's a pop of a face-up card, it is a Banish 3, as well as the Omni Negate, and Insane Follow-Up. On top of this, we could have also had an SP Little Knight, I just goofed up the combo. That being said, we're also playing against Branded with a 6-card hand. Let's see what they can accomplish. They're going to start off here with the Foolish Burial, sending the Tragedy to the graveyard. Pretty expected. They're then going to add the Quem, which is a bit strange, but okay. Activate the Quem effect, going for the Fallen of Albaz. Now they go for the Branded opening, and I realize, oh, this is why they already had the Branded opening. Makes more sense to go for the Quem here. They're going to activate the effect of the Alibra to grab up the Branded Fusion, and again, I haven't really interacted with them. There's nothing that I can interact with that or is, like, warranted. They activate the Branded Fusion, I activate the F.A. Dawn Dragster, and at that point, they concede, realizing the rest of the cards in their hand aren't going to get them there. Unless they had, I don't know, triple tack Grass, that is fairly accurate. So, good game. Alright, so here we are going first, and we did end up drawing the full combo for the Crystron off of the Foolish Burial, so that's nice. That being said, I do make a bit of a mistake here. I should normal summon the Tristaros immediately, because it just punishes the opponent for basically interacting with me. I don't do that, and it does actually end up costing me here. So we're going to go for the Sulfafnir in order to special summon out the Sulfador, which then promptly gets Impermed. Had I the ability to activate our Tristaros here, we could have punished them for interacting there and just synchroed the monster off, and then they wouldn't have done anything there. So this is a big mistake on my part, and it's something that, again, I'm still learning the deck. Like, I literally have had no interaction with this deck previously. Like, it never really showed up in TCG all that often, and it's like the first time I've really interacted with it in Master Duel, so I really am not too familiar with the combos, and even then, it's still performing fairly well for me. However, I have noticed that, like, a lot of the times I'm losing due to my own mistakes, which is just me not being comfortable with the deck. That's fine. We normal summon the Tristaros and go for the Skeletus. The Skeletus effect is going to activate to add back the Sulfador, and then we can use the Tristaros to just pop the Skeletos, and then get 2 bodies onto our field. Notably, the Smiter and the Tristaros. The reason we go for the Smiter here is because we can just use the effect of the Skeletus in order to special summon the Sulfafnir, and we still haven't used the Sulfador. So we're going to special summon out the Sulfador here, and then we can still just make our Infinity. So even though I played very poorly, I still have the ability to make our, you know, fairly decent end board. Out comes the Smiter effect as well to grab up Cluster, and we're going to set 2 and pass. This is, again, doesn't look nearly as strong as it is, but having the ability to use Infinity on top of Cluster, on top of Tristaros, in order to go into F.A. Dawn Dragster with the Called By and the Veiler is very solid. So let's see what my opponent can do. They're going to start off here with the Drill Beam, targeting the Affinity, and honestly, I'm wondering if, like, hindsight's 2020, I know what's going to happen, but I, in the moment, was wondering if I should even negate this, because all things considered, sure, the Infinity gets banished, but I could have activated the Tristaros to immediately go into F.A. Dawn Dragster, and that is very solid against a lot of decks, and seeing the Drill Beam, it's probably very good against Blue Eyes as well. I'm guessing it's Blue Eyes. It could be potentially, like, Fiendsmith Control, but, like, honestly, F.A. Dawn Dragster is fairly solid here. So, I don't know if this is necessarily the correct play, and they immediately go Combat, and I go, yeah, that maybe wasn't the correct play. That being said, we still have Cluster, so we're just going to pop the Lordly Load here, and then they normal summon the Sage. I'm going to activate the Veiler. If last card in hand is Maiden or Called By, I get heavily punished here, but if it's literally not exactly one of those 2 cards, which is 4 copies of a potential card, I have a pretty good play here with negating. It appeared not to be the case. They concede that they are realizing the writing on the wall, and yeah, good game. Alright, we're back with the deck, and honestly, I don't know how much the ban list actually mattered here, just in general. First of all, I didn't play it prior to the ban list, but second of all, I really don't think that this actually changed much to do with Crystron. Maybe it changed a little, obviously, like not having access to the Millennium cards consistently does matter, but with that being said, I don't know how much it matters if kind of everything else also remained the same and or got ever so slightly weaker. like, Snake Eye got ever so slightly weaker alongside of this, and Blue Eyes, like, I guess technically is just as strong, and those were, like, the 2 decks that were actually above Crystron. Everything else was comparable in nature, so I don't think that this actually pushes this in any way, shape, or form out of the metagame, or in, like, lower on the tier list, or anything of that nature. That's kind of it. I think it still remains the same, and remains in more or less the same spot, where it was during the Duelist Cup. And the only reason I say that is because a bunch of the other stuff also got weaker, so for the most part, it's still very good. On top of that, this deck is pretty solid to play. I don't think, obviously, like, the post-ban list, this much changes, but, like, overall, this is a solid deck. I think a lot of the things that make this viable is because of the simple fact that so many people are playing Bestials and or ways to counter Fiendsmith in particular, and this deck happens to play very well around that. On top of that, this deck doesn't exactly lose to things like Maxi or Foolos or something else of that nature because of the way that it inherently works, right? Being able to summon on the opponent's turn is very advantageous, right? On top of that, the end board is very solid and surprisingly like difficult to deal with if done correctly. I did not do that correctly. That being said, you can go watch Tatsuku. I'll try and leave a link to his channel in the description, but you can go watch him to get a better understanding as to how this deck really functions when you actually know how to play it. And for the most part, it's pretty solid. I'm not saying, like, it's the most difficult thing to understand or to play well enough to, like, climb, but for the most part, I think that there is a lot more that you can do as a better player than something like Blue Eyes, right? And all in all, that is something that makes it rather interesting. There's a lot of different lines, there's a lot of different ways that you can play the game depending on each individual card within your hand, and it makes it a little bit more interesting to play just overall. That being said, I don't know how good this is, and I don't know how much it's actually worth playing. It kind of depends on how willing you are to commit to this deck in particular. It seems similar in nature to Branded, where you basically have to play a lot of time with this to really put in the necessary reps to actually make it work. I guess Memento is a better example rather than Branded. Branded is an enigma unto itself. But Memento is similar, where it's like, you really have to understand how Memento specifically plays, and Crystron is very similar in that nature. You gotta know how Crystron specifically plays. That being said, I don't think the ban list changed it. I don't think it's, like, all of a sudden not a viable deck. And on top of that, I still do think that this is kind of a meta call. I would not suggest playing it if you're like, oh, I think it's the best deck. It's not. It's far from it. I wouldn't even say it's, like, the 3rd best deck, but it's up there. That's all. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, I like very much appreciated. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye.